My name is Mark Moss. I'm the Executive Director of Tell Us Something. I'll be your host tonight. This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to Tell Us Something by MCAT. Tell Us Something acknowledges that we are on the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. In September, I said this too, and one of the things that I said then is the way that we can honor the Salish and Kalispel indigenous peoples is to educate ourselves about them. I don't know if you noticed, but for the past 2 years, what was once called the Higgins Street Bridge was under construction. It has been renamed the Bear Tracks Bridge when it finally reopened in early October in honor of Grizzly Bear Tracks, a highly respected Salish sub-chief from the mid-1800s. With an understanding that Missoula has always been at the heart of the overlapping territories of the Salish and Kalispel peoples, Missoula County worked with the Confederate Salish Kootenai tribes and the Tribal Council and the Culture Committee over the past few years to name the reconstructed bridge in honor of the valley's original inhabitants. Tribal members selected the new name Bear Tracks Bridge as a tribute to the Vanderburgs, a prominent and highly respected Salish family. There are 6 interpretive signs at the south end of the bridge that we can use as a beginning to educating ourselves about those who lived in this valley before being forced out. We take a moment to honor the land and the native people and the stories that they share with us, and we commit to do better by them through better behavior and by educating ourselves about their history and current culture. Thank you to our stewardship sponsor, Blackfoot Communications. The Tell Us Something Stewardship Program gives away free tickets to individuals and organizations that might, for whatever reason, not otherwise be able to come to Tell Us Something. So thank you, Blackfoot Communications. Thanks to our storyteller sponsor, Biga Pizza. They are the reason that we can compensate the storytellers tonight. So thank you to Biga Pizza. And thank you to our accessibility sponsor, Grizzly Grocery. Because of their generosity, we can provide American Sign Language interpreters for our deaf community. And I also need to say thank you to Imagination Brewing Company. The team at Imagination and I worked together to collaborate on a beer that is a benefit beer, and every pint and can sold at the brewery, they give $1 to Tell Us Something. It's pretty awesome. You can get this beer, it's called Do Tell. You can get this beer at Warden's and Biga Pizza and the Bottle Shop, and it's on tap here tonight. And it's on tap at the Dram Shop Central, and it's on tap, obviously, at the brewery. It's at Warden's and the Good Food Store. So check it out over there. The label is beautiful. It was a painting done by Tell Us Something's board chair, so check that out. His name is Joseph Grady. So thank you for choosing to join us this evening. I know that many of you haven't been here before. Some of you haven't been here, so for those who haven't been here, I'm going to give you a little rundown of what's going to happen tonight. We have 8 storytellers. They each have 10 minutes to tell a true personal story from memory, and the theme for the night is It's the Little Things. And at 9 minutes, because they've got a little timer that they can see. Oh, what happened to the timer? Where's Jason? Okay, so, hey, oh good. So at 9 minutes, Jason's on the board too, and Jason is gonna hit this gong like this. So that's not like, get off the stage, that's just like, hey, don't forget, you've got only a minute left. That's what that means. What happened to the timer? Okay. So, storytellers, it seems that maybe you won't be able to watch the time countdown. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. There's a merch table. You've got Tell Us Something pint cups and tote bags and free sticker with every purchase while the stickers last. There are posters from every event this year, as well as a 10th anniversary commemorative poster available back there. Let's see, what else? Oh, I was trying to also explain that we have a 10-minute intermission after the fourth storyteller, and then we'll come back and hear the last 4 stories. The storytellers have really worked hard on their stories, and I would love it if you would give them all your attention and love. Please silence your cell phones and other noise-making devices. You came to listen. Let the listening begin. I say this every time, and I really mean it. It is important to actively listen to one another, join together, and to support one another by sharing stories with each other and with our community. At every event, I say, this is your community and these are your stories. The stories you hear at each Tell Us Something event are by and for members of this community. And you can do this too. Anybody can tell a story up here. The way to do it is you call a pitch line, 406-203-4683. You can also go to tellussomething.org and click Tell a Story to learn more about what I'm about to say. And you have 3 minutes to leave your pitch. And after you've done that, it goes into a Dropbox folder, and we have a programming committee. We all listen to them. And then I call everybody back and say, you made it or you didn't make it. And then there's a one-on-one workshop with me, and then there's a group workshop with all of the storytellers. So they've been working really hard for a long time. The next show, I know what the theme is, not sure what the location yet, and it'll be in March sometime, and the theme is the first time. So if you have a first time story, get ready for that. Thank you for your support of each other and of each other's stories. Tell Us Something believes that everyone has a story and everyone's story matters. Know this. Tell Us Something storytellers sometimes have adult themes in their stories and sometimes use adult language. Our first storyteller tonight is Ian Kessler. Ian Miles Kessler is a playwright, theater artist, and storyteller originally hailing from the East Coast. A recent transplant to Montana, Ian relocated to Missoula to enroll in a Wild to Ride Academy, which is a Mustang ranch and equine program. And there he learned the process of gentling wild horses. He's proud to be a level 6 graduate of that program and thrilled to be sharing his story tonight. Currently, Ian is working on his debut novel. Please welcome Ian Miles Kessler.
One of my earliest memories is when the dishwasher broke, and the guy my mom hired to come fix it. This big burly guy comes to the door. He's got a t-shirt, work jeans. He smells like cigarettes and coffee. He lays out his wrenches and he gets started. I'm like 3 or 4, and I'm standing in the kitchen doorway, and I'm just transfixed. I mean, I cannot peel myself away. When I was a kid, I always liked watching men work. My parents, they were never together. They both wanted a kid. They each needed the other to do it. But I was raised by my mother on the East Coast entirely. That was always the deal. So the memories that I have of my father are really scant, but really deeply imprinted. When I was really little, he'd send me postcards from the Great Plains, the Black Hills, this part of the world. He's seen and hiked and camped the backcountry more than maybe I ever will. I have them, those postcards, in a old shoebox. And they're dull things, pretty tame. Stuff like, hi Ian, how are you? Or, happy birthday. Or, tell your mother I said hello. And all of them are signed the same. Sincerely, your father. It wasn't until years later that I realized that I've never not known how to spell that word, sincerely. It was like it got imprinted in the back of my mind. When I was 10, I spoke to him on the phone for the first time. And that was my choice. My mom made it really clear that I always could. It just had to be something that I wanted. And it's going to sound funny, but turning 10 really sort of spun me for a loop. I didn't feel like a little kid anymore, you know? I felt like a kid, but it did feel like some part of my childhood had shifted. It wasn't something I could hide behind, you know? I had to talk to this man. I had to handle this thing. So my mom calls him, sets it up. I'm sitting in the dining room, and the light's coming in from the kitchen, and I got the phone pressed up to my ear. And my mom told me years later that it was really, really, really clear to her that I was really, really, really nervous. But the truth is, I don't remember any of it. I couldn't tell you what was said, what we talked about. What I do remember is hearing his voice on the other end of the line for the very first time. I've always loved my father's voice. It sounds carved, you know, cured. I've always coveted his voice. I've always wished it was mine. When I was 14, I went out to spend time with him alone for the first time. That was his idea. He was remodeling a house out in Chadron, Nebraska. He said I could go out there, work for him. I'd learn a few skills. He'd pay me. Be a good deal all around. My mom was really anxious, of course. I mean, I'd never spent time with him alone before. But I jumped at the chance, you know. I mean, I was 14 years old. Even then, I didn't think something was going to shift between us or change. But what you have to understand is that my father comes from a farm in rural Wisconsin, right? He comes from a time and a place where if you work like a man, you get treated like one. And this just felt like my shot, a chance to stand alongside him. It was summertime, and we worked outside. And my father works without a shirt on. And he is so brutally thin. I mean, this man does not eat. He's so skinny, there's something almost feral. It feels diseased to look at him, you know? I remember looking at him, and I felt like I could see every line of bone, every vein, every ligament, like I could see the insides churning in his belly, you know, that kind of skinny. I'm standing there, and I'm watching him work in the yard. You know, he's tearing out drywall or puttering with the car. And I can see the line of his back, where he'd broken it when he was 15 and fell out of a hayloft, or his sternum that was chipped years and years ago, or the veins that just poured down his forearms. It was the first time I'd ever seen his body up close. Now, the truth is, I was not very good at the work that he gave me. I did not take to it. No, not at all. My father has a temper, and he's not a man with patience for children. So, mostly I just learned to keep quiet. 2 weeks came, and 2 weeks went. There was no big moment between us. When it was over, he drove me to the airport, he shook my hand, and I went home. I didn't know him any better. We hadn't talked much. I just sort of seen him up close. Now, it's funny to me, at least, because I've told that story to people, lots of people, people that I know and love, and people that I don't know as well. And without a shadow of a doubt, they always say some version of the same thing. Well, he's your dad, and he loves you, and I'm sure that you love him. Do you love your mailman? Do you love the guy who changes the oil in your car? The fellow you hire to fix the dishwasher when it breaks? You don't love men that you don't know. I wish there was more that I could say about it. I wish there was some sort of finality I could put to it, but the truth is, as I stand here on this stage today, I'm 34, and I've met that man face to face maybe 20 times. And there's far too much there, and just not enough all at once. And if I'm honest, I don't really know what to make of all that. We still talk, and we're still not close, and that's probably not going to change. But the older I get, the deeper those similarities seem to run. Ain't that growing up for you? We're both reserved men, and we both work really hard. And we both got more pride than we know what to do with. And looking back, to borrow a phrase, it really is. It is those little things those bits and pieces that you don't realize that you don't know. You know, the sound of your father's voice, or the cursive of his handwriting, or the way that his body catches sunlight and shadow when he works in the yard. And the thing that I'm starting to realize now, that I didn't know when I was little with the postcards, or 10 on the phone, or 14 out in Chadron, Nebraska, is that slowly you turn into a man that you don't know. And that is really scary. That feels like I'm walking on shaken ground. Because still, the same question rattles in my head. How do you love a man that you don't know? And the answer is I'm not sure.
Thanks, Ian. Our next storyteller is Hannah Harvey. Hannah is an artist and person living in Missoula, originally from Helena. She is a University of Montana graduate. If you've ever visited the Missoula Art Museum, you may recognize her as the face behind the front desk. When she's not at work, she can be found painting, drinking hot cocoa at Break Espresso, and looking for creepy crawlies. Please welcome Hannah Harvey.
The first frog I ever met was at Park Lake on a camping trip with my parents when I was 10 years old. My dad had scooped it out of the water and placed it in my little cupped hands, and then and there, I fell in love. I loved its smooth, soft skin. I loved its tiny hands with fingers that looked just like mine. And I loved that when you looked at its chest, its thin, white, papery skin showed the tiny, rapidly beating heart inside. It was like a little hummingbird heart. I remember holding that frog and thinking about how nice it felt to take care of it, to hold it, to care about it. I let the frog go and watched it swim away. And while I don't condone handling frogs, because it is not particularly safe for the frog or the human, I will say that that experience stuck with me for a very long time. I remembered that frog again many years later in 2019 when I was living in Virginia. The house that I lived in was right by a little saltwater inlet, and there were lots of water reeds and grass that frogs like to hide in. And when I was falling asleep at night, I would hear the chorus of frogs singing. Some people who I met in Virginia said that they found this sound annoying, but I loved it. To me, it was like white noise, except it was frog noise. And hearing all those little voices singing often made me feel less lonely as I was falling asleep. And loneliness was a feeling that I had a lot when I was living in Virginia. I had lived in Montana my whole life until moving there. And I, like many others, moved across the country with no rhyme or reason except for the fact that I was in love with a boy. I had met this boy in Missoula at college, and when he returned to live back in his home state of Virginia, I went with him. I was so excited because he had this little quaint house there. I was going to move in. We had it all planned out. We were going to have our lives together. We were going to do all those fun things that couples do when they first move in together. We were going to build our relationship. We were going to get married and have kids. It was all planned out. It was perfect. And then his family decided to move in. His parents and his brother, myself and my boyfriend, were all packed into this tiny house. And I grew up with a very demure, quiet family. We do not talk about our problems because we were all raised Catholic. So no problems here, no problems here. But my boyfriend's family, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately in some cases, was not this way. They were loud and rowdy and rambunctious. They took up a lot of space. They had fights at the dinner table, and I just could do nothing but sit there and watch. And I wanted to be the one calm presence in their lives. I dedicated myself to being the best girlfriend possible, to make them proud that their son had a partner like me. I was quiet. I didn't argue. My boyfriend's mom even called me Mr. Rogers because I was so goddamn agreeable. But the thing about being agreeable all the time is that you lose yourself, and I started to feel parts of myself slipping away. I stopped doing the things that I loved. I didn't sing as loudly. I didn't paint as large. I didn't talk as much, and I slept all the time. When I wasn't at work, when I was at home, the only things I wanted to wear were comfortable clothes, and the only comfortable clothes at my disposal were my boyfriend's old pajamas from 7th grade. I would put them on, the sad, plaid, ratty, tattered pants, and a shirt from an event that he participated in long before I came into the picture. And I would look in the mirror and see myself dressed as somebody else. My depression got worse and worse. And with it, so did the weather. The spring in Virginia is pretty tough. It rains a lot. It's always dreary. And one night in particular, it poured. It was windy, it was rainy, there was thunder, lightning. It was like a big storm from a movie. And in the morning, while my boyfriend and I were sleeping in bed, his mother busts into our bedroom, because that's what happens when you live with your boyfriend's family. And she says, "There is the biggest frog I've ever seen in our yard, and I don't know what to do about it." That was the fastest I have ever gotten out of bed in my entire life. I put on my boyfriend's Crocs, because of course, and I ran outside, and I saw this giant frog by our dumpster. It was also the biggest frog I had ever seen, about as large as my hand. And I could tell immediately that it had a hurt leg and that it was missing one of its eyes. Perhaps it got caught up in the storm or got in a fight with a wayward cat. But the moment I saw that frog, something in my brain woke up. And that frog became my mission. I couldn't care for myself. Some nights I couldn't brush my teeth because I was so sad, but God damn it, this frog was worth saving. When I would go to work in the day, and when my boyfriend had the days off, he would be home. And the frog didn't move. It was still alive. I could tell by that same tiny beating heart in its chest. But it seemed just incapable of moving. It would look around with its eyes. It would shift slightly, but it didn't move. So when I was away at work, I would make my boyfriend water the frogs, because I know that frogs need water. It's kind of like oxygen to them in a way. It's where they get all their nutrients. They breathe through their skin, and their skin needs to stay moist. So every day I made my boyfriend water the frog. I would text him and say, "Okay, did you water the frog?" And he'd say, "Yes, blah, blah, blah." But after a few days of this, I tried feeding the frog, I tried doing everything, and it wouldn't move. It was still alive, it was still breathing, still looking around, but it wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, wouldn't do anything. And finally, when I got home from work one day and I saw it sitting there sadly, I went inside. I got a plastic salad container, I poked holes in it. I put a little bit of water in the bottom. I put the frog in there, closed the lid. I called a wildlife rehabilitator and said, "I have a frog, I'm bringing it to you." She said, "Well, we don't usually take frogs, but fine." And then I set off on my journey. The wildlife rehabilitator's place was in Chesapeake, which was about 45 minutes away from where I lived. And it was another rainy night. It was stormy, it was pouring, it was thundering, it was lightning, and I am not a good driver. But I put that frog in its little box in my passenger seat. I buckled it in as tight as I could, and then I just drove. And I was driving like a maniac. It was insane. I felt like I was in Fast and Furious. I've never driven that fast. People were honking. I was doing stupid things probably. I was like, don't honk at me right now. This is an ambulance. There's a baby in here. I drove. I finally made it to the wildlife rehabilitator's place. I unclipped the seatbelt. I picked up the box. I brought it into her. I said, here's this frog. He has a hurt eye. He has a broken leg. I named him Uno because he only has one eye. And I gave it to her, and she went, okay. And then I got in my car and I left. I asked her to text me to tell me what became of the frog, whether good or bad, but I never heard back from her. It's possible that Uno just passed away. It's also possible that the rehabilitator gave him to one of her other creatures as food, which I guess either way, somebody benefited from that, so. But I moved away from Virginia shortly after that. I came back home. I had friends again. I had family again. I felt whole again. I was sad to end that relationship, but I was withering away in it. I like to think that Uno is out there. I like to think that he's had lots of frog babies with lots of frog ladies. And I like to think that he's happy now and that he's better now, because I am.
Thank you, Hannah. Our next storyteller works at one of the places that sponsors Tell Us Something, MissoulaEvents.net. Lori Chase has two almost adult children, 2 cats, and 2 jobs. She teaches yoga and works for Gatherboard, also known as MissoulaEvents.net, the best community event calendar in Missoula. In her free time, she likes to do all the outdoor things and dance Argentine tango. Lori has sat in the audience of Tell Us Something many times over the past several years, always thinking that one day she too would stand on the stage and tell us a story. Please welcome Lori Chase.
Wow. So in December of 2015, I moved out of the home that I owned with my husband and into the Gold Dust Apartments, a low-income housing unit on Missoula's north side. The first night that I spent in that apartment, I had a mattress on the floor, and it echoed. It was so empty. It was the first time in over 20 years that I'd actually lived alone. I fell asleep that night to the sound of the train, rumbling, clanking, whining, and the sound of people honking their horns in the Orange Street underpass. Please don't do this. People live there. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of a huge boom that rattled the entire building that I later found out was the coupling of the trains, and I wondered how I would ever get used to that sound, but I did get used to it. I also got used to the thin black layer of coal dust that settled on everything, the North Side spice. Then later, my kids came to stay. We borrowed more furniture. We settled in. When the kids were with me, the place was crowded. It was a very small apartment. But when they went to their dad's, I was lonely. I really wanted to have a pet, but there were all these rules there. No incense, no candles, no smoking, no noise after 10 p.m., no pets, no nails in the wall. So I got lots of plants, and I named them all. Always knowing that eventually I was going to buy my own house as soon as the divorce was final. But when the divorce was final in August of 2016, I went to a lender who told me that I couldn't buy a house because my debt-to-income ratio, due to my student loan, that didn't work out. And also, I didn't have the longevity of employment because before this time, I had been a part-time yoga teacher and a full-time stay-at-home mom. So that didn't really count. So I went home, disappointed, visualizing a bigger apartment where I could get a cat. And 3 years went by. The kids kept getting bigger, and the apartment kept getting smaller. And then one day I went into work, to the office where that I share with my boss, Molly. And Molly was sitting at her desk working. And I sat down and I started looking through some mail, and out fell this flyer. And it was all about this affordable housing that was going up, brand new townhomes. And it was everything that we wanted. It was 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, a garage close to downtown, our own laundry. I could get a pet. I was super excited. It was perfect for me, and I was perfect for it. And the application deadline was in 2 days. And I had to get pre-qualified for a loan. I had to get all these little things together. And I looked at Molly and I said, there's no way I can do this in 2 days. I have all this work to do. And she said, no, you have to do this. Forget about the work. I know a lender. And she starts like writing down names and like all this stuff, getting to work. Okay, fine. So I do it. I spend the next few days getting my application together. And I get the application in, and then I keep calling. Is it accepted? Is it accepted? And finally, it's accepted, okay. And then they say, but, you know, actually, out of all the people who pre-qualified and got accepted, it's a lottery. And so we're basically going to pick names out of a hat to see who gets to buy one of these. 7 lucky people get to buy one. And so I waited. I had to wait like 2 weeks. It felt like a really long time. And then I got the call. I won the lottery. I was able to buy this place. Yes. But wait, this was only the beginning. I had the opportunity to buy this place for $100,000 less than what it was worth. Amazing. And so I started jumping through all the hoops. Like I had to take some classes and go to a lawyer and blah, 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 blah. And I'm doing all the things. And then my lender calls me one day and she says, well, you know, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but we just found out, you know, we figured out the HOA fees and you just don't have a big enough of a down payment. And I had already tapped out all my resources, my mom, my dad, my friends, like everybody. And I said, well, how much is it? Maybe I can still come up with it. And she said, $10,000. And I was like, $10,000? Like, where am I going to come up with $10,000? I don't know. But as I was thinking about it, true story, I went to the mailbox and I got a check in the mail from my dad for $10,000. And he knew what I was going through, but he didn't know this particular thing. And he said, I just had a feeling that you might need some more money for, you know, closing costs and moving and that sort of thing. And I was like, whew, I'm back in the game. So I called the lender and I said, I got the $10,000. She's like, a little skeptical, like, where did you come up with $10,000? No, seriously, my dad gave it to me and she said, okay, but still, you cannot spend any money. Your debt can't go up, your savings can't go down. You can't spend any money at all for the next few months. This was in January of 2019. And so I was like, fine, I'm just going to work as much as possible and not spend any money. So I'm doing it. I'm doing all the things. And then she calls and she says, you know what, I'm sorry. They just figured out the taxes and you actually just don't make enough money. And it was like, I'm working as much as I can. I don't know what I can do. And I was distraught. I had already done all the little things. And so I went into the office to work that day, and my boss, Molly, was there. And she said, hey, how you doing? And I said, you know, when somebody asks you how you're doing, I just broke down. And I explained the whole thing to her. And she said, well, would it make a difference if I gave you a raise? And I said, Probably, I don't know. And she said, how much? So I called the lender, found out, and she said, I'm so sorry, I should have given you a raise years ago. I've been meaning to do it. I'm just gonna give you a raise for that amount, and then you can buy the place. And so she did. And so I was back in the running for the place. And I was holding my breath, just waiting for the day that I could sign the papers and just waiting for something else to go wrong. And then finally, the day came and I signed the papers and I moved into my place. Soon after, I got a cat. And that was great. And soon after, another one of the places where I worked, the yoga fitness center, closed. And I was sad, mostly because that's where I practiced. And then more time went by, and I found out a couple years later, Katie, who owned the yoga fitness center, passed away. She had cancer. And it wasn't until after that that I found out that they knew what I was going through to get my place. And they waited to close their business until I signed the papers on my home. So this morning I woke up in my home, greeted by my cats, feeling oh so grateful for my home and all the little things that came together so that I could buy my place. But also, and most especially, so thankful for my friends and my family and the community that believed in me and helped me to buy my home. So thank you. Thank you, Missoula.
Thank you, Lori. So I try not to make this show about me. I try to just like get on here and get off as fast as I can and have the whole thing be about the storytellers. Tonight, I'm going to be a storyteller. My name is Mark Moss. I live on the north side with my wife Joyce and our perpetual kitten Ziggy. I'm the executive director of Tell Us Something. I'm going to tell you a story tonight about my journey with Tell Us Something. And it's more than that. It's also a story about gratitude and joy and depression and teamwork and beauty and community. I was sitting in the dark at the Top Hat, listening to a woman on the stage tell the story of when she was a little girl going with her mom to Belt, Montana, and she wasn't allowed to come into the house because her mom and her grandmother were going up to Belt to, and she didn't know this yet, brush her great-grandmother's hair. And her great-grandmother lived in basically a shack. And one afternoon, she had to go into the shack for whatever reason. And now she learns why her mom and grandmother are there. Because her great-grandmother Anna's hair is so long that it pools on the floor while they're brushing her hair. And it's white. And it's August, which is important because the shack is occupied by a hive of honeybees. And there are so many of them that the walls bleed honey in the heat. And she's describing all of this, and I'm looking around the room, and everyone is transfixed. And she did such a beautiful job of honoring her ancestors and the care that 4 generations of women were taking care of one another. And I felt so honored to be in that room with some of you were there, I'm sure. And that her voice was shaking and she was there to honor her family. Later, I'm sitting in that same dark room at the Top Hat, listening to a member of the Crow tribe describe leaving the reservation and what a rift that drew between him and his father. And he would go back to visit occasionally, but never leave, never come back, for good, until his father got sick. And he moved back for 2 years and took care of his dad. After his dad passed, one of his dad's friends said, "Your dad wanted me to give you this war bonnet, which is one of the highest honors to bestow on a son." And I was, again, humbled and honored to be learning about this part of the culture. And I was just floored. I'm telling you all of this to show that I fell in love with the stories and the storytellers. And I'm sitting in this dark room, and I'm listening to a woman share her story about being sexually assaulted in the United States Marine Corps and surviving that. And now she's an attorney in town, and she provides justice for survivors. And a woman that I don't know is standing out on the sidewalk, another Tell Us Something, and the show was sold out, and she asks, "Do you have any tickets?" I said, I don't have any extra tickets. And she handed me 2 envelopes and said, "Give one of these to Victoria, the storyteller from the Marine Corps." And I said, "I will." And the other one was addressed to me. It was 7 o'clock, so I had to come in and start working. She ended up somehow getting a ticket and was there. But after I introduced the first storyteller, I go backstage and I start crying reading this letter, because the letter said that she had been so depressed for years that every time she went over the bridge, she wanted to jerk the wheel into the Clark Fork. And she said when she heard Victoria's story about surviving that in the Marine Corps, she went home and wrote in her journal and sobbed and had an emergency appointment with her psychologist the next day. And she says that Tell Us Something saved her life. And she gave me permission to tell you that. When I first started Tell Us Something, I had a job at a bank. And when I worked at the bank, every minute I was spending there, I was thinking about how I could make Tell Us Something better. And I got my first smartphone because I didn't want to use bank equipment to do Tell Us Something work when I was on my breaks. So I'm updating the website on this little Android phone. And I've struggled with depression my entire life, so much to the point that I have a lot of coping strategies, and I know when I can see when an episode is coming, and I can prepare for it and maybe shorten the duration of it. In 2015, I missed all the cues, and I felt like I got hit by a freight train with depression. I couldn't get out of bed. I was just feeling so sad. And I'm standing at the kitchen, in the kitchen at the stove with Joyce behind me, just bracing myself on the stove, sobbing. I couldn't stop crying. And she was just, shh. She didn't say it's okay. She didn't tell me to stop. And that night, in the dark, in bed, she said, "What would make you happy?" And I said, "Doing Tell Us Something full-time, because it is a full-time job." And she said, "Then you should do that." And I said, "What if it fails?" And she said, "What if it succeeds?" And it was that little way to think about it that gave me the courage to quit my job. And I quit my job, and I've been doing Tell Us Something full-time ever since. And sometimes we hear stories like, I don't know if anybody was in this room when Mike Colucci had told the story about sucking the crown from his tooth up into his sinus cavity. It was a comedy. I mean, oh my gosh. Or the guy who told the story about being the person who has to quarantine the losers from The Amazing Race. Or the woman who just ran out of gas at Costco and how the community came together to help her. And you've been with me on this journey the entire time. Thank you. You have told your stories. You have come to support the storytellers. And for that, I am so grateful and full of joy. Tell us something. The entire thing is an act of trust. I trust that when I put out the call for stories, storytellers are going to show up. I trust that when I put tickets on sale, y'all are going to buy tickets, and you're trusting me to provide you with entertainment, sadness, like ugly crying, and then huge laughter. You are trusting the storytellers to share of themselves. Most of you know I don't introduce the storytellers ahead of time because I want you to come together as a community and support one another as a community. You know when you were in grade school or middle school and high school and you leaned back in your chair, braced against the desk? That's sometimes how Tell Us Something feels, like we're just about to fall over. And you come, and you support each other. And I'm just so grateful to you for that. It may seem like a little thing, but it to me is a big thing. And the biggest part of the Tell Us Something journey recently is that we became a nonprofit. And that is a big thing. I built out a board, I wrote the bylaws, I got an attorney, and he filed the paperwork in August of 2021, and we just got our nonprofit status in July of this year. And so I would love to introduce you to one of my board members, Rachel Bemis. She told a story on this stage in March. Rachel, come up. Oh, here she is.
Thank you, Mark, so much for sharing your story. My name is Rachel Bemis. I am on the board of directors for Tell Us Something. I serve as board treasurer, and some of you might recognize me from my story in March that I told about my grandfather and our adventures in New York City. I'm here today to share a little bit about our organization before we take a break. We, as Mark mentioned, are officially a nonprofit, which is very exciting. This has been a passion project for over 10 years. Many of you have been coming to the events, just like myself, during that time. The first 3 years, there was no cost to come, so you could sit in the audience. We are now officially a business, a nonprofit, and we need your help. For the last 2 years, as you know, we have not had any live events due to COVID, so just getting back into the swing of things. And that, of course, means no revenue as well. So you will see during intermission a couple things right behind me. Please feel free to get your phones out. You have permission at this time to click on the QR code, PayPal, Venmo. You can go to our website. Our board members will be in the lobby wearing really attractive t-shirts along with our remittance envelopes. $10, $20, $50, anything will help us so much. We are truly in dire straits right now. It's not an exaggeration. We don't like to ask for donations. We certainly don't plan on having this as a habit at live events, but we need to do it tonight. So keep us in mind. Please keep us in mind. You can take a remittance envelope with you, write a check, cash, whatever works for you. The merch table is open for donations. Whether you have fallen in love with us tonight for the first time or you've been in love with us for some time, please show your generosity to an organization that you clearly love, and you make it a point to come out and enjoy our stories. The future of Tell Us Something is dependent on the generosity of our community. There's an ATM in the lobby. Venmo, did I say that? PayPal, website, cash, check. We certainly have revenue from ticket sales, but it's not enough to sustain us. So please keep us in mind. Enjoy your intermission. We will see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for your generosity tonight. Oh, I didn't bring my notes. That's all right. Our next storyteller is Jim Hart, and I'm just going to try this from memory. He has loved film his whole life and hails from New Jersey and just recently arrived here in Montana. And he is an actor and just breaking back into that, and he's also a storyteller. Please welcome Jim Hart.
Well, this isn't the first time I've spoken to an audience in a movie theater, which the Wilma was, but it's the first time I've talking about it in a movie theater. So before I moved to Missoula, the home of the great Roxy Theater, I was film projectionist at George Eastman Museum's Dryden Theater, where I projected everything from silent movies to modern independence to flammable nitrate film. And before every film, somebody walked up to a podium at the front of the stage and gave an introduction to the film. And when they were done, I slowly faded out their spotlight and started raising the curtain to the screen and slowly fading out the lights to the theater. And then I started the projector at just the right moment, so the movie hit the screen when the curtain was up and the lights were down. And it was just one of the little things that movie theaters do to give more than a movie. And one time between Christmas and New Year, I had to introduce the film and project the film. I told the audience this was because our fundraising goal had not reached its goal, and we could only afford one person, so there was still time to make a donation, so this doesn't happen next year. Well, my first movie theater was our New Jersey living room. Dad was really serious about his home movies, how he filmed them, edited them, and presented them. When we came into the dark room, he had already had this projector and the roll-up screen set up. And as we sat there on our folding chairs, he started up the projector with that wonderful sound. And his homemade title came up on the screen. Ocean City, 1964. And we laughed as we saw ourselves dancing and splashing in the waves. There were no mistakes. Dad cut that all out. These were real movies starring us. Dad helped me make my first film, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I played the doctor, my brother and my friends played the other parts. Dad filmed it and did this wonderful narration. I showed it at the Boy Scout Hobby Show in the little room they gave me that I turned into my own movie theater, and I won first prize. Thanks, Dad. Our hometown movie theater was the Strand, like the Wilma, a movie palace built in the 20s. It was a great theater, had really expensive popcorn. Now, there's an old saying in the movie business, movies for yucks, popcorn for bucks. Movies get the audience in, the profit is at the concession stand. So to avoid paying the high Strand popcorn price, I walked down to the Woolworth store and bought a gigantic bag of popcorn for 10 cents and smuggled it in. And I probably was responsible for the Strand closing 20 years later. Now, back then, the only way to see a new movie was at a theater, and the only way to see an old movie was on TV. Well, Mom and Dad were really strict about what we were allowed to see. But fortunately, there was the 4:30 movie. Monday through Friday, Channel 7 showed old films in series weeks. Science Fiction Week, Monster Week, Western Week. And Mom and Dad figured, what's the problem? They're old movies after school. Well, little did they know that they also had Crazy Lady Week with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which was definitely not a kid's film, and got an X rating in England when it opened. So I was learning about film and I was learning about life. And when I moved to New York City in the 70s to go to NYU Film School, there were all these movie theaters that showed old films. And they were called repertory theaters, and they were great. And after college, one of my first jobs was managing one of them, the Cinema Village, which is still there, down there in Greenwich Village, and still owned by my boss, Nick Nicolau, the hero of independent theaters, who was in the 2019 documentary, The Projectionist, which you should all see. It was a cash business. The customers paid their money, went through a turnstile, and saw 2 films that changed every 2 days. And the beginning of one double feature on the first day, the first film was a 1968 film I'd seen on the 4:30 movie, Wild in the Streets. The plot was, what would happen if 18-year-olds got the vote? And what happened was a rock star becomes president after his band dumps LSD into the Potomac River. And the Congress, tripping their brains out, passes a law that 14-year-olds can vote. And the president sends all the old people over 30, including his parents, to concentration camps where they have to wear purple robes and drink acid and trip all day. So about 2/3 of the way into Wild in the Streets, the projectionist calls me. Says, yeah, I thought you should know the film's going to end in 10 minutes. So I looked at the screen. I said, it's supposed to end in 30 minutes. He goes, yeah, I know. They didn't send the last reel. Well, unlike today with digital projection where you press a button, it shows the movie straight beginning to end, with film projection, you had 20-minute reels which you switch back and forth between 2 projectors to give the illusion of a continuing movie. So I told him, this is what I want you to do. Before the reel runs out, close the lens to the projector so we don't see white light on the screen, and mute the sound so we don't hear snap, crackle, pop, and raise the lights. I'm going to talk to the audience. So I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jim Hart, manager of the Cinema Village. I'm very sorry to tell you they didn't send us the end to the movie. So if you would like a refund, we'd be glad to give it to you as you exit the theater. If you'd like to find out how the film ends, you can stay, and I'll tell you. So they stayed, and I told them. The president, stoned out of his mind as usual, is driving his Rolls Royce until he comes to a park. And he gets out, and he's playing imagination games like a little boy until he comes to a pond with a small dock. And he lies down on the dock, and he sees a string going down into the water. He pulls the string up. There's a crayfish on it. He holds it up to his face, and as he's going to touch it, it bites him. He stands up and he stomps on it. 3 boys run up and say, what did you do? He was our friend. He was our pet. And the president scowls down at them and says, I killed it. What are you gonna do about it? You're not old enough to vote. And as the president saunters off, one of the boys looks right in the camera and says, we're gonna put everybody over 10 out of business. And the audience applauded. And they were happy, and I was happy. I had given them something more than a movie. Enjoy the show.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Walked off with the microphone like you're going to see him every single time, it seems like. Thank you all for your generosity. I don't know what the final number is, but I just wanted to share. So far, we've raised about $5,500. So thank you all so much. And Rachel wasn't lying. Like, we need you. I didn't get paid last month, and I actually had to personally loan Tell Us Something money this month. So just so you know that. I also forgot to thank our sponsors, so I want to do that really quick. Thank you also to our American Sign Language interpreters, Bonnie Curian and Stella Woodrum. Thanks again to our stewardship sponsor, Blackfoot Communications, and our storyteller sponsor, Big Pizza. Thanks to our accessibility sponsor, Grizzly Grocery, and thank you to our media sponsors, Missoula Broadcasting Company, Gecko Designs, and MissoulaEvents.net. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, Joyce of Tile. If you need tile work done, give her a shout. She's booking into June right now. And thank you to Float Missoula. When you frequent these businesses, please thank them for their support of live storytelling in Missoula and let them know you appreciate what they do for us. And most of all, thank you for being here tonight. We have an event coming up in January that is a low barrier to entry. It is on January 29th. Thank you. At the Dram Shop Central, which even if you don't want to come tell a story, you should come check out the artwork in there, because we always hire, or we try to always hire, a local artist to design our posters. And so all of the posters from the past 10 years are framed and hanging at the Dram Shop Central through the end of January. So go check that out, get yourself a do-tell, and tell some stories. But on the 29th, we're having something that I like to call Story Jam, which means there's no theme. Stories are 5 minutes. You sign up that night and just give it a whirl. See what you think. It's pretty fun. We've done 2 of these in the past month, and it's really pretty fun. So come check that out on the 29th. And then the last thing I'll say before I get back to the main event here is that the next main stage Tell Us Something event is sometime in March. The theme is It's the First Time. So if you have a first time story, be thinking about that. Watch the newsletter and social media for more information as it becomes available. Thank you so much for that. Okay, back to it. Our next storyteller is Abigail Gilbert. Yeah, get ready. Abigail Gilbert is a professional actor, educator, and director who originally hails from Duluth, Minnesota. She is proud to work at the Missoula Children's Theater as the tour marketing associate and social media specialist. Ooh. Bring her on, volunteer, tell us something. And she also works at Studio M as a teacher and vocal instructor. On stage, she was most recently seen as Columbia in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, live right here at the Wilma, and as Little Red Riding Hood in Into the Woods at the Missoula Community Theater. She was recently voted Missoula's Best Actor in the Missoulians' Best of Missoula 2022 contest, and she would like to thank her mom, Lisa, and Miles for their support. Please welcome Abigail Gilbert.
It's the middle of March, and I am in Sterling, Nebraska, population 482. I am here because I am on tour with the Missoula Children's Theater, and I have a wonderful tour partner named Michael. So our job as tour actor directors was to travel from town to town each week all across the country in a Ford F-150 and teach children a musical. We would arrive in each town on Sunday, and on Monday, we would cast the students in the musical Pinocchio. We would cast 50 to 60 of them. Then we would start rehearsal. We would teach them the show all week, and then by Friday or Saturday, they had a 1-hour-long musical ready to perform for their community and their family and friends. Michael and I would travel with all of the little pieces needed to put on this musical in the back of our truck. We had the props, the set, the costumes, the lights, and then on Sunday we would pack it all up and drive to the next town and do it again. This particular week in Sterling, Nebraska, we were staying with a lovely woman named Deanne, who opened her home to us for the week. It was Monday morning, and we had a meeting at the school in town where we were going to meet the principal, who was our point of contact for the week. Now, Michael and I had been on tour together at this point for about 2 months, so naturally, I had already lost my set of car keys. So to get into our Ford F-150, we would have to unlock the driver's side door, and we didn't have any automatic buttons to unlock or lock, so we'd unlock the driver's side door, reach across the cab, and then unlock the passenger door. So on this particular Monday morning, standing in Deanne's driveway, I decided that I was going to unlock the driver's side door and throw the keys over the top of the car to Michael. The moment the keys left my hands, I knew that they weren't going to make it over the top of the truck. Michael and I watched them fall between the cab and the topper, nowhere to be found. They didn't fall through onto the ground. You couldn't peer over the top of the car and see them. You couldn't stick your hand in the grooves of the truck. They were lost. Deanne graciously offered for us to use her car to get into town. She drove a little black, standard-looking car with a push to start. So we headed into town, and the town of Sterling was small. It was a restaurant, a few shops, the school we were working at for the week, and a mechanic. We had just a little bit of time before our meeting, so I headed down to the mechanic to ask for help. I walk in, and the air is filled with smoke, and there are 2 men sitting in the back, dirty white tank tops, chain smoking. I walk in, and I explain to them that I have stranded our truck in Deanne's driveway, and can you help us? They said, "Oh, we know, Deanne. We'll head down there right now and get your car." I thanked them profusely and headed back to the school. When Michael and I's meeting concluded, I had a text on my phone from Deanne that said, "Hey, they were able to rescue the keys. Is there any way that you can get my car back to me and come pick up your truck?" She also shared with me that they were able to rescue the keys by laying on top of the truck and sticking a fishing line with a magnet on the end to get the keys. So I looked at the clock. I had just enough time to drive the 20 minutes back to Deanne's house, get her car back, get back in the truck, drive to the school, and be on time for the audition. So I told her I'd be on the way. I get out to the front of the school where we had left Deanne's car, and I start driving back to her house. When I arrive, I park in the garage. I meet her there, hand her keys. She gives me the rescued truck keys, get in the truck, start my way back to the school. 20 minutes there and back. As I pull up back to the school, there is a woman standing on the sidewalk outside of the school, and she is pointing at what appears to be me in my branded Missoula Children's Theater bright red truck, and she's screaming. I'm looking around like she can't be screaming at me. I just got here. I'm going through the list of everything I've ever done wrong in my entire life. And none of it involves Sterling, Nebraska. I've only been here for 24 hours. So I quickly park the truck, I jump out, and I can finally hear her, and she's screaming, "You stole my car! You stole my car!" And I'm still looking around. What does she mean I stole her car? No, I drove Deanne's car here, and then I drove Deanne's car back, and Deanne met me in her garage. I gave her the keys. She saw the car. What does she mean I stole her car? I say, "Ma'am, I am so sorry, but I do not know what you are talking about." And she said, my keys, they were in the cup holder and I have a push to start. And then I realized that when I got into Deanne's little black push-to-start car, I actually got into this woman, Janet's push-to-start little black car parked in front of the school and drove it away. I stole her car. I said, ma'am, if you just wait right here, I'm just gonna go get your car. I raced back to the truck, raced back to Deanne's house, 20 minutes, the longest 20 minutes of my entire life. I don't cry very often in life, but when I say that I sobbed the entire way back to Deanne's house, I mean it. The Missoula Children's Theater has been touring for 50 years. We're celebrating our 50th year of touring. Yes, thank you. Across the world and the country. And the reason, one of the many reasons why people love to bring Missoula Children's Theater back to their community over and over again, year after year, is because of our incredible reputation. And they hire tour actors who represent that image and represent that organization that's bigger than themselves. They hire people who are professional and kind and friendly and care about the mission of teaching life skills to children through the performing arts. Stealing a vehicle is not a part of that. So I finally get back to Deanne's house, and I race into the garage, and she meets me there because she hears me coming, and she says, Abigail, why are you back here, and why are you sobbing? I said, Deanne, and I pointed to the stolen car in the garage. I said, Deanne, this is not your car. And she took a long, hard look at the car, and she said, you know what, Abigail? Now that I take a closer look, that is not my vehicle. And sweet Deanne, she put her arms out, and I just melted into her, and she said, Abigail, I think you just need a hug. This woman that I just met 24 hours ago, just holding me in her garage next to a stolen car. And finally I said, Deanne, I have to get this car back to the school. I get in the stolen car. Of course, it pushes to start right away because sure enough, the keys are right in the cup holder. Drive back to the school, 20 minutes. I am white knuckling the entire way back because I'm in a stolen car and it's icy and snowing, Nebraska in March. When I finally arrive back at the school, Janet is sure enough waiting right where I left her, and I hand her her keys and I said, I am so sorry that I stole your car. And she said, I am so sorry that I yelled at you, and I am rethinking leaving my keys in the car. Now, at this point, I am very late for the audition that I'm supposed to be at. So I, at some point, texted Michael, who's running the audition by himself, because he's amazing. Hey, so I've had a little situation. I'm okay. Everything's fine, but I'm going to be a little late. I get back in Deanne's car, 20 minutes back to her house. I get back in the truck, 20 minutes back to the school. At this point, hours later, I have just barely stopped sobbing, and I get ready to go back in the school. I've got the truck, I've got the keys, and I paste a smile on my face, and sure enough, I walk into the gym, and Michael is perfectly, beautifully running an audition with all of these children who are hoping to be a part of our cast of Pinocchio. And I look at Michael and I give him a nod that says, hey, everything's okay, but wow, do I have a great story for you later. It's the little things. Losing the keys, throwing the keys, the push to start, not recognizing the wrong car in the garage. Sometimes the little things have really big consequences. Thank you.
Thanks, Abigail. Look, I remembered my notes. Our next storyteller is Regina O'Brien. Regina put herself through college working a montage of odd jobs for 11 years. She graduated with 2 bachelor degrees and eventually got a career with the federal government. After years of seeing people staying in positions they hated so that they could have a secure retirement, having that security bled out by illness, death, or catastrophe, and feeling stressed out and ineffective in her own job, she quit. She got rid of everything that did not fit in her mid-sized pickup and started driving. Regina has been living around the edges of mainstream society ever since. Regina is a relative newcomer to Montana and currently lives in Potomac and works in Missoula as a massage therapist. Please welcome Regina O'Brien.
God. I lived in a teepee for a year and a half in the Jemez Mountains in north central New Mexico. I had gotten a job in one of the little villages there, and housing was really tight. And the teepee was a good alternative to nothing. And living a life like that, you learn a few things. Now, most people know what a teepee looks like, and what they know is the skin. And that is essentially a big umbrella. It keeps the rain off, but it's really drafty. What makes it work is the canvas liner on the inside. It is connected to the teepee poles at about chest high, and it goes all the way to the ground. This liner, basically, it keeps the draft from going into the living area and funnels it up to the smoke hole. It does not do a good job at keeping out the neighbors. The ones who were there first. The mice, the rock squirrels, the tarantulas. And knowing that I could have surprise visitors at any time, I learned to pay a lot of attention to my surroundings. It's one of the benefits of tarantulas. Teepees have no windows, and I couldn't look outside. And I found that, well, I don't know if my senses became more acute or if I just paid more attention to them, or probably both. But I found that I could identify the birds flying overhead by the cadence and the sound of their wing beats. I learned that the wind going through a pinon pine sounds different than the wind going through a ponderosa or a juniper. What I didn't realize until I left the teepee was how integrated my senses were to my awareness. When I left the Jemez and wound up in a real house, I felt safe. I had real walls. I had windows I could look out of. I had a door I could lock. But when I went to bed that first night and I started going to sleep, I had this strong sense that something was wrong. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. And I wound up going from room to room to room, trying to figure out what was wrong. And I realized I was looking out of all of the windows. It was night, it was dark, I couldn't see anything. And what was wrong was, I didn't know what was going on outside. In the teepee, you have this constant flow of air going through. And that airflow let me know what the weather was doing. I could feel the temperature change, the moisture in the air. I could smell the pinon pine. I could taste the dust. I could hear the coyotes in the cars from miles away. And in the house, all of a sudden, my senses were confined to the inside of the house. And I learned I had to reassess what safety meant to me. When I first moved into the teepee, it was late summer, but I was at over 6,000 feet elevation, and I knew winter was coming pretty soon. So I went to talk to my landlady, Ariana, who lived like 50 yards away in a 2-room dirt floor shack. She was upscale, she had a wood stove. And I said, how much firewood do I need? You know, how cold does it get here? And she goes, you know, I got rid of my thermometer years ago. I did not need to know it was -20 inside my house. Good to know. I got some cinder blocks and I raised my sleeping platform. I had 2 rugs, my insulated sleeping pad, a winter weight sleeping bag, a queen-size alpaca wool blanket folded in half on top of the sleeping bag, another blanket on top of that, and my coat, which doubled as my robe. My sleeping attire consisted of thermal underwear, heavy-duty sweatpants and hoodie, at least 1 pair of socks, a knit cap, and wool gloves, fingerless so I could find and use the zipper in my sleeping bag. In the long evening hours between sunset and bed, I usually had a cup of tea. On one particularly cold evening, I made the mistake of having 2 cups of tea. And even though I used the chamber pot, after I went to bed, nature called. And it was really nasty because I had to do more than pee. I had to go outside and use the pit underneath my special tree. The fire was out. It was dark. It was freaking cold. And I knew if I procrastinated, it would only get worse. So I unzipped my sleeping bag, and I found my flashlight, turned it on, and you have to bear in mind that this next part, I was trying to keep as much heat inside the sleeping bag as possible. So I pulled my coat up to myself, put it on, and I could feel my body heat going into the coat. I checked my shoes to make sure that I was the only one in them. Got out of the sleeping bag, put my shoes on, and I could feel the cold seeping through my socks. I got up, picked up the flashlight, and was headed towards the door, and something made me check my chamber pot. And the clear fluid that was in it was now opaque and kind of slushy. And I realized that Ariana was right. There were some things you really did not need to know. So I went to the door, I untied the thong that kept the liner in front of the door, pulled that back, took a breath, ducked down because the opening was like this tall, pushed the drape aside, went outside, and I was transfixed. I no longer felt the cold. There was no moon that night, and there were so many stars. My mind went numb. And the sky was so incredibly, absolutely, unforgivably black that it looked solid. The night sky, it didn't just look, it was a black, solid dome about 20 feet over my head. The stars were not little orbs in the sky, they were pinpricks, they were perforations in this solid black sky. And I remember thinking that if I had a ladder, I could climb up there and I could push against the sky. And I was wondering what it would feel like. I don't know how long I stood there. I know that I visited my pit and made my tree happy. But I don't remember doing that. And I remember beginning to shiver because even though I wasn't aware of the cold, it was still affecting me. And my brain kicked in, and I know I needed to go back to my bag. But I don't remember doing that either. All I really remember is a phrase that I heard from a Celtic storyteller years ago, and at the time I didn't understand it. He was describing something as having a terrible beauty. And when I looked at that sky, I was so intimidated and so amazed. That sky, it enfolded, I was immersed in that sky. I could just feel myself expand. And that sounds stupid even to me. I mean, but all I could think of, I could feel that incredible beauty to my bones. Later on, it was my second winter. It was February 1st, 7 a.m. I was doing my morning routine. The fire was burning well. My coffee was brewing. I was fixing breakfast. And overhead, I heard this weird sound. It was a staccato, warbly, shrieky, moany, groany sound that lasted all of 3 seconds. No idea what it was. I shrugged it off, took care of my breakfast. I still had to make lunch and I'd get ready for work. And when I got to work a little while later, the ladies at the front desk were talking about the morning news, and I said, "That's what that sound was." And they looked at me. They didn't hear anything. They were inside their house. And another woman who was standing there goes, "I heard it too." She was outside feeding her chickens. And that sound that I shrugged off so I wouldn't burn my own meal was the sound of 7 people dying as the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart and its pieces and the bodies tumbled across the sky over my head. In a month and a half, that'll be 20 years ago, and I can still hear that sound. The little things that make a difference in your life. The things that you ignore, you don't acknowledge, a piece of information you hear, the movement of air against your cheek, a 3-second soundbite. Those kinds of things will change your perspective, open your world, nail an instant to your heart for the rest of your life. Those little things are not little.
Thank you, Regina. Our final storyteller of the evening was he was in the very first Tell Us Something show ever at the Missoula Art Museum. And he told one at the Top Hat, and I'm really pleased to welcome back to the stage Jeremy N. Smith. Jeremy N. Smith is a journalist, podcaster, and author. He has written for The Atlantic, Discover, Slate, and the New York Times, among other outlets. And he and his work have been featured by CNN, National Public Radio, NBC Nightly News, The Today Show, and Wired. Jeremy's from Evanston, Illinois, and has lived for the last 20 years in Missoula, except for last year when he spent a family year abroad with his wife, Chrissy, and daughter, Rasa, in Puerto Escondido in Oaxaca, Mexico. I practiced this, I swear I did. I don't speak Spanish. His latest interest is skateboarding. And he's looking for someone to help teach him how to ollie. So if anybody knows how to do that, grab Jeremy after the show. Please welcome Jeremy N. Smith.
$1990, mid-December, middle school. It's lunch period, and my fellow nerd, Josh Engelman, and I are holed up in our social studies teacher, Mrs. Fisher's classroom, working on an extra credit project on if and where to locate a third airport for the city of Chicago. The discussion is so intense, I start pacing around Mrs. Fisher's wooden desk. Josh thinks this is funny, so he grabs a piece of chalk and starts tallying my laps on the blackboard. 1, 2, 3, with a big X when I get to 10. Because Josh thinks it's funny, I think it's funny, and I say, I'm gonna go around this desk 1,000 times. And 20 minutes later, when the bell rings, lunch over, there's already about 100 marks on the board. At this point, Mrs. Fisher enters. She is a stern, white-haired woman wearing her customary shapeless, sort of muumuu-style polka dot print dress. We have never seen her smile, much less laugh, but she must have had a couple extra shots of something in the teacher's lounge. Retirement is on the horizon. It is winter break next week. And so when she says, what's going on? And Josh says, he's going around your desk 1,000 times. She's like, okay, Einsteins, this I want to see. Our classmates roll in a few seconds after that. They say, what's going on? And Mrs. Fisher points to Josh. Josh points to me and he says, he's going around her desk 1,000 times. And they're like, yeah. And so for the next 45 minutes, 25 perfectly healthy, intelligent students, instead of learning social studies, watch me go around in circles. 150, 200, 250, 300 times. And then the bell rings and people laugh and they clap and they leave. And we have science now, Josh and I. And I looked to him like, what are we gonna do, right? We're extra credit kids. We don't ditch class. We like stay in at lunch to make an extra one. But then the next social studies class rolls in. And they say, what's going on? And Mrs. Fisher points at Josh. And Josh points at me. And he says, he's going around her desk 1,000 times. And they laugh and they clap and they cheer. And like I forget about the airport. And extra credit and 4 credit. And for the next 45 minutes, we ditch science and 25 more perfectly healthy, intelligent students instead of learning social studies. Watch me go around a desk 350, 400, 450, 500 times. Next is math class. Oh well, we ditched that. And then finally, fittingly, final period, we miss gym. At this point, I have been walking with purpose for like 2 to 3 hours. I'm a chubby kid with glasses and my like ankles and calves are throbbing. My chest is hollowed out. My glasses are like coming off my sweaty head. I don't know how this started. Like, but this isn't just what I do, this is like who I am now. Okay? I'm like a marathon desk circling machine. And like the whole school knows about it. I'm legendary in progress. And I said that Josh was my fellow nerd, but Josh actually doesn't have glasses. And Josh is a relatively more athletic rollerblader. And Josh has twice experienced something that I haven't even dreamed of, which is having a girlfriend. So this is it. This is my moment in the social spotlight. I can't keep going, but I have to keep going. And so I power on, I stumble forward, and finally, the whole class stands and they chant together the final steps of my journey. $9.97, $9.98, $9.99, $1,000 just as the bell rings. Last class, last period, school's out. I did it. Yeah. And everyone's, the cheers, the applause, high fives louder than ever. And then they shrug and they gather their stuff and they go. And then Mrs. Fisher shrugs and gets her stuff, maybe goes back to the teacher's lounge and goes. And then Josh shrugs and gets his stuff and goes to meet his girlfriend. And it's just me in the classroom with the blackboard with 1,000 marks and the carpet I've worn circles in and like my great white whale of this desk. And I shrug too and I get my stuff and I limp home. And I have had 32 years to figure out what happened. And I've come up with these 3 lessons. First, there is a reasonable debate people can have about whether 1,000 of something is a little or a lot. It is more than 10 and 100 on the one hand. It is less than 1 million or 1 billion on the other hand. And I'm just here to tell you, I know. Okay, I have the experience. If you do anything at all 1,000 times, even walk around a desk, you will know that 1,000 of anything is a lot. Number 2, if you marry repetition to ambition, you can accomplish great things. I have spent the last 20 years working as a writer. That means I'm basically professionally a desk circler. And so I know intimately well that if you write 1 page in a day, that's not very much. But if you write 1 page a day for 1,000 days, wow, you have just written a whole book. Third, last, and most important, the reverse is true too. Even if you have done something 1,000 times in a row, even if it's how everybody knows you for better or for worse, even if it's not just what you do, it's who you are, if it's not serving you anymore, you can stop. I went to school the next day, and I got a very stern talking to in science. I got a makeup test in math. And limping, wincing, I was made to run laps for 45 minutes in gym. But before that, I went into social studies. And there was the blackboard, fresh, clean, newly erased. There was the vacuumed carpet, not a trace in it. And there was the desk eyeing me saying, "Want to go again?" And I just shook my head and I stumbled forward and I went right to my seat. And it was just a little thing. But let me tell you, something so little has rarely felt so good.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for being here tonight and supporting your community and for your generosity. Big thanks again to our American Sign Language interpreters, Bonnie Curian and Stella Woodrum. Thank you to our stewardship sponsor, Blackfoot Communications. And our storyteller sponsor, Biga Pizza. Thank you to our accessibility sponsor, Grizzly Grocery. Thank you to Imagination Brewing Company for Do Tell. Remember to pitch your story for the March show. It's the first time, and then come to the Dram Shop for the art show and Story Jam on the 29th. Most of all, thank you to our storytellers, Ian Kessler, Hannah Harvey, Lori Chase, Mark Moss, whoever that guy is, Jim Hart, Abigail Gilbert, Regina O'Brien, and Jeremy N. Smith. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you in January and in March. Have a safe drive home.